The blood-red sunset stretched across the Wyoming sky like a wound as Beatrice Newman dropped to her knees in the unforgiving soil. Her 22nd birthday had passed just 3 days ago, celebrated only with the silent company of withered corn stalks and the distant howl of coyotes. The abandoned farmstead near Opal, Wyoming Territory, had become both her prison and her sanctuary in the spring of 1876, a cruel irony that wasn't lost on her as she dug her raw fingers into the earth and prayed for rain that wouldn't come. Beatrice wiped sweat from her brow, leaving a streak of dirt across her sun-bronzed face. Her honey-brown hair had long ago escaped its pins, falling in tangled waves down her back as she worked. The field stretched before her like an endless sea of responsibility, 15 acres that had once been her father's pride, now her burden alone since the fever had taken him last winter. Her mother had departed years before, unable to bear the isolation of frontier life, leaving only a tear-stained letter and the lingering scent of lavender water. "Just one more row," she muttered to herself, the words carried away by the hot afternoon breeze. Her shoulders ached with exhaustion, but she couldn't stop. The bank would claim the property if she didn't manage a decent crop, and where would she go then? She had no family left, no prospects, and a woman alone had few options in this untamed territory. The sound of approaching hoofbeats made Beatrice freeze. Visitors were rare this far from town and rarely brought good news. She slowly reached for the small knife she kept tucked in her boot, a habit her father had insisted upon, and concealed it in the folds of her skirt as she stood to face the rider. The man who approached on a chestnut stallion didn't look like trouble, but Beatrice had learned appearances could be deceiving. He sat tall in the saddle, broad-shouldered and lean, his face shadowed by a well-worn Stetson. As he drew closer, she could make out the fine layer of trail dust that covered his denim pants and the faded blue shirt that had seen better days. "Afternoon, madam," he called, his voice carrying across the field as he reined his horse to a stop at the edge of the row she was working. He dismounted with the fluid grace of a man who'd spent most of his life on horseback, and Beatrice tightened her grip on the hidden knife. "This is private property," she called back, her voice stronger than she felt. "State your business." The stranger removed his hat, revealing hair the color of sun-bleached wheat and eyes as blue as the summer sky. He couldn't have been more than 25, with a face that might have been considered handsome if not for the thin scar that ran along his jawline. "Name's Adam Harrington," he said, respectfully keeping his distance. "I'm looking for work. Was told in town the Newman place might need an extra pair of hands." Beatrice narrowed her eyes, suspicion written plainly across her features. "Who told you that, fellow at the general store?" "Hendricks, I believe, said the owner passed on and his daughter was trying to manage alone." He gestured to the vast field around them. "Seems like a mighty big task for one person." "I'm managing just fine," Beatrice said stiffly, though the lie tasted bitter on her tongue. The truth was, she was barely keeping her head above water, rising before dawn and working until she could barely stand, only to do it all again the next day. But pride kept her chin high and her voice steady. Adam didn't argue, merely nodded as his eyes scanned the fields with an experienced gaze. Without another word, he set his hat back on his head, rolled up his sleeves, and stepped into the row beside her. "What do you think you're doing?" she demanded as he knelt and began pulling weeds with practiced efficiency. "Helping," he replied simply, not pausing in his work. "You can decide if you want to hire me after you see how I handle myself." "Fair enough." Beatrice opened her mouth to protest, then closed it again. She was exhausted, behind schedule, and in desperate need of assistance, whether she wanted to admit it or not. And there was something in his straightforward manner that made her hesitate to send him away. "I can't pay much," she finally said, kneeling back down to resume her work. "Barely enough to feed myself these days." "Room and board would do for now," he said, his strong hands moving steadily through the soil. "I've been on the trail a while, could use a place to settle for a spell." Beatrice studied him from the corner of her eye, trying to discern his true intentions. Cowboys rarely stayed in one place for long, and those who did were usually running from something or someone. "You in trouble with the law, Mr. Harrington?" A smile quirked at the corner of his mouth. "No, madam, just a man looking for something more permanent than driving cattle. Gets lonely on the trail." They worked in silence for a time, the rhythm of their movements falling into a natural synchronicity that surprised Beatrice. She'd grown accustomed to working alone, to making all decisions without consultation, to the sound of nothing but wind and the occasional bird call for company. The presence of another person, especially a man, should have been more jarring. As the sun began to sink lower in the sky, casting long shadows across the field, Adam finally broke the silence. "I never did catch your name, Miss Newman." Beatrice paused, suddenly aware of how disheveled she must look, hair wild, dress soiled, face streaked with dirt and sweat. It had been so long since she'd introduced herself to anyone new. "Beatrice," she said after a moment. "Beatrice Newman." Adam nodded, as if confirming something to himself. "Well, Miss Beatrice, I think we've made good progress for one afternoon." He gestured to the row they'd cleared together, which was indeed more than she would have accomplished on her own. "I suppose we have," she conceded, straightening to ease the ache in her back. In the fading light, she could see more clearly the face of this stranger who had appeared so unexpectedly. His features were weathered by sun and wind, but there was a gentleness in his eyes that didn't match the hardness of his calloused hands. "So," he said, dusting the soil from his palms, "do I have the job?" Beatrice hesitated. Logic told her to be wary of a stranger, but desperation whispered that she couldn't possibly maintain the farm alone, and there was something about Adam Harrington that felt trustworthy, though she couldn't have explained why. "On a trial basis," she finally said. "1 week, then we'll see." A genuine smile spread across his face, transforming his features and causing an unexpected flutter in Beatrice's chest. "Fair enough, Miss Newman, I promise you won't regret it." As they walked back to the farmhouse together, the first stars beginning to twinkle in the darkening sky, Beatrice couldn't help but wonder if she just made the wisest decision of her life, or the most foolish. The farmhouse stood like a sentinel against the encroaching night, its weathered boards and sagging porch a testament to years of struggle against the harsh Wyoming elements. Beatrice led the way, suddenly self-conscious about the state of her home. It had been her father's pride once, but time and circumstance had taken their toll. "The barn's out back," she said, gesturing to the structure that stood about 50 yards from the main house. "There's a small room there with a cot, used to be for the farmhand before." She trailed off, unwilling to delve into the painful memories of better days. Adam nodded, seeming to understand the unspoken. "That'll do fine, Miss Newman." "I'll fix some supper," Beatrice said, suddenly aware of how hungry she was. "Nothing fancy, mind you. After trail rations, anything hot will seem like a feast." While Adam tended to his horse, Beatrice entered the kitchen and set about preparing a simple meal of beans, bacon, and cornbread. As she worked, she found herself stealing glances out the window toward the barn, still half expecting her new hired hand to mount up and ride away. But true to his word, Adam emerged from the barn and made his way to the house, stopping to wash his hands and face at the pump before approaching the door. His knock was respectful, and when Beatrice called for him to enter, he removed his hat before stepping over the threshold. Such simple courtesies seemed almost foreign after so many months of solitude. "Smells mighty fine," he said, standing awkwardly just inside the door until Beatrice gestured for him to take a seat at the worn oak table that had been her mother's pride. They ate mostly in silence, the unfamiliarity of company making conversation difficult. Beatrice found herself studying him when she thought he wasn't looking the way his hands dwarfed the utensils, the careful precision with which he ate, as if savoring each bite. "Been on your own long?" He finally asked, breaking the silence. Beatrice set down her fork. "Pa died in January. Pneumonia took him quick. Before that, it was just the two of us for about 8 years." She didn't elaborate on her mother's departure, the wound still too raw to discuss with a stranger. Adam nodded, not pressing for details she wasn't ready to share. "My condolences. It's not easy losing family." Something in his tone suggested he spoke from experience, but Beatrice didn't inquire further. Everyone in these parts had their share of loss. It was almost a prerequisite for surviving the frontier. "What brings you to Opal?" she asked instead. "It's hardly on the main trail." Adam's gaze flickered to the window as if the answer might be found in the gathering darkness outside. "Looking for a fresh start, I suppose. Drove cattle from Texas to Montana for 5 years. Saved every penny I could. Thought maybe it was time to put down roots." He smiled ruefully. "Sounds foolish when I say it out loud." "Not foolish," Beatrice said softly, "just unlikely in these parts. Most folks are just passing through or barely hanging on." "And which are you, Miss Newman?" The directness of his question caught her off guard. "I'm surviving," she finally said. "One day at a time." He nodded as if that was exactly the answer he'd expected. "Well, maybe with 2 of us working, we can do better than just survive." After supper, Adam insisted on washing the dishes despite Beatrice's protests. As she watched his large hands carefully handling her mother's chipped china, she felt a strange tightness in her chest. It had been so long since anyone had helped her with anything, since she'd shared a meal or a simple conversation. "I'll need to be up before dawn," she said as he dried the last plate. "There's a lot to do if we're going to save this crop." "I'll be ready," he promised. "Been up with the sun most of my life." He bid her a respectful good night and headed out to the barn, leaving Beatrice alone with thoughts and feelings she hadn't experienced in longer than she cared to remember. She told herself it was merely relief at having help with the overwhelming workload, nothing more. But as she lay in her bed that night, listening to the familiar creaks and groans of the old house, she couldn't deny the small spark of hope that had ignited in her heart, hope that perhaps she wasn't destined to face her struggles alone after all. Morning came with the first tentative rays of sunlight peeking through the threadbare curtains of Beatrice's bedroom. For a moment, she lay still, savoring the brief respite before the day's labor began. Then memory flooded back. She was no longer alone on the farm. A stranger named Adam Harrington had arrived yesterday, offering his help. Beatrice dressed quickly in a faded blue work dress, pinning her hair back securely before making her way downstairs. To her surprise, the smell of coffee already filled the kitchen, and through the window she could see Adam at the water pump, freshly shaved and ready for the day's work. When he entered the kitchen a few minutes later, he removed his hat and nodded a greeting. "Hope you don't mind," he said, gesturing to the coffee pot. "Thought we could both use a strong cup before heading out." "Thank you," Beatrice said, pouring herself a cup. The rich aroma was a luxury she rarely indulged in, saving the precious coffee beans for Sundays or particularly difficult days. "You're up early," said I would be. Adam accepted the cornbread left over from the previous night that she offered him. "Figured I'd check on the irrigation ditch while I was at it. Looks like it could use some clearing out." Beatrice paused with her cup halfway to her lips. "You know about irrigation?" A small smile played at the corner of Adam's mouth. "Wasn't always a cowboy. Grew up on a farm in Missouri before heading west. My pa made sure I knew how to coax life from reluctant soil." This revelation shifted something in Beatrice's perception of the man before her. Not just a drifting cowhand then, but someone who understood the rhythms and requirements of farm life. The knowledge was both reassuring and unsettling. If he was truly as capable as he seemed, why was he here, offering to work for mere room and board on a struggling farm? They ate a simple breakfast, and as the sun cleared the distant mountains, made their way to the fields. The day's task was clear: continue weeding and thinning the corn to give the strongest plants the best chance at survival. It was tedious, backbreaking work, but with 2 sets of hands, they made steady progress. By mid-morning, the sun beat down mercilessly, and Beatrice paused to wipe sweat from her brow. Adam worked a few rows over, his movements efficient and practiced. She watched him for a moment, still trying to reconcile his presence in her carefully constructed solitude. "Was your father a good teacher?" she found herself asking, the question escaping before she could consider it. Adam straightened, stretching his back before answering. "Hard but fair. Believed a man should know how to provide for himself and those dependent on him." He paused, a shadow crossing his features. "He died when I was 16, took a fall from the barn roof during repairs after a storm." "I'm sorry," Beatrice said softly, understanding all too well the abrupt pain of losing a parent. Adam nodded, accepting her sympathy without wallowing in it. "What about your father? Seems he taught you well enough to run this place." "He did his best," Beatrice replied, returning to her work to hide the emotion that threatened to surface. "After Ma left, he had to be both parents. Taught me everything he knew about farming, said a woman should never have to depend entirely on a man for her survival." "Sounds like a wise man." "He was," she swallowed hard, "but even wisdom couldn't save him from pneumonia." They fell silent then, each lost in their own memories as they continued their work. The shared understanding of loss created an unspoken bond between them, a tentative bridge across the chasm of unfamiliarity. As the day progressed, they established a rhythm, working together with minimal need for conversation. Beatrice found herself oddly comforted by Adam's presence, the sound of his movements in the adjacent rows, the occasional comment about the soil or the weather, the way he anticipated what needed to be done without being told. By late afternoon, when the heat became almost unbearable, Adam suggested they take a brief rest. He produced a canteen of water from his belt and offered it to Beatrice first, a courtesy that touched her more than it should have. "Your father would be proud," he said as she handed the canteen back. "Not many could keep a farm like this going on their own, especially not a—" He caught himself before finishing the thought. "Especially not a woman," Beatrice finished for him, a hint of challenge in her voice. Adam had the grace to look embarrassed. "I meant no disrespect, just that farming's hard enough with a family to share the load. What you've managed is impressive regardless." Beatrice softened slightly at his sincerity. "It hasn't been easy," she admitted. "There are days I'm not sure I can keep going." "What keeps you here?" Adam asked, his blue eyes studying her with genuine curiosity. "Most women in your situation might have sold up, moved to town." It was a question Beatrice had asked herself countless times during lonely nights and exhausting days. "This land is all I have left of my family," she finally said. "My grandfather homesteaded it, passed it to my father, who meant it to go to me and whatever family I might have someday." She looked out across the fields, seeing not just the struggling crops but the years of sweat and hope invested in each acre. "I can't bear to let it go, not without fighting for it first." Adam nodded slowly, as if her answer confirmed something he'd suspected. "Well, Miss Newman, it appears you've got more fight in you than most men I've known." They resumed work as the afternoon waned, accomplishing more in one day than Beatrice could have managed in 3 on her own. As they walked back toward the house in the golden light of early evening, she felt a curious mixture of exhaustion and exhilaration, the satisfaction of meaningful progress coupled with the strange comfort of shared labor. "I think we've earned ourselves a proper meal tonight," she said as they reached the yard. "I've got some salt pork and potatoes we could fry up." Adam smiled, the expression transforming his weather-worn face. "Sounds like a feast. I'll just see to my horse, then I can help with whatever you need." As Beatrice watched him head toward the barn, she realized with a start that she was actually looking forward to preparing and sharing a meal with him, an activity that had been merely functional for so long now infused with an unexpected warmth. She quickly dismissed the feeling as simple gratitude for his help, but a small voice in the back of her mind whispered that perhaps it was something more. Later, as they sat across from each other at the kitchen table, the room lit by the warm glow of oil lamps, Beatrice found herself relaxing in Adam's company in a way she hadn't with anyone in years. "Where did you learn to cook?" she asked, noting how he'd expertly helped her prepare the meal, suggesting a pinch of dried herbs from his own supplies to enhance the simple dish. "On cattle drives, everyone takes turns. You learn quick or you eat poorly," he explained with a shrug. "And my ma made sure I knew the basics before I left home. Said no woman should have to shoulder all the domestic burdens." "Your mother sounds like an unusual woman," Beatrice commented, surprised by such progressive thinking. A fond smile touched Adam's lips. "She was, headstrong and independent. Pa used to say she could outwork, outthink, and out-argue any man in the county." The smile faded slightly. "Lost her to influenza the year before Pa died. So you were orphaned at 16. Beatrice asked softly. Adam nodded, his gaze distant with memory. Had a younger sister, too, Emily. She went to live with our aunt in St. Louis after Pa passed. Last I heard, she'd married a shopkeeper there. He looked up, meeting Beatrice's eyes. What about you? Any siblings? Beatrice shook her head. Just me. Ma had complications after I was born, couldn't have more children. Is that why she left? The question was gentle, but it still made Beatrice tense. Partly, maybe. She never adapted to frontier life, missed her family in Boston, the society, the comforts. Beatrice traced the rim of her cup with one finger. She stuck it out for 12 years, then one spring morning she was just gone, left a note saying she was returning east, that she couldn't bear another Wyoming winter. The old pain resurfaced, dulled by time but never completely healed. She wrote a few times after that, but the letters stopped coming about 4 years ago. I'm sorry, Adam said, and Beatrice could tell he meant it. Must have been hard on both you and your father. It was. Beatrice didn't elaborate further, unwilling to expose more of her personal wounds to this man who was still, essentially, a stranger. As if sensing her reluctance, Adam changed the subject, sharing a humorous tale from his cattle driving days that soon had Beatrice laughing despite herself. His gift for storytelling was evident, painting vivid pictures of life on the trail that both entertained and provided glimpses into the man he was. By the time they finished the meal and cleaned up together, Beatrice realized the evening had passed more pleasantly than any she could remember in recent years. As Adam prepared to head out to the barn for the night, he paused at the door. Thank you for the meal, Miss Newman. And for giving me a chance to prove myself. You worked hard today, she acknowledged, suddenly aware of how close they were standing in the narrow confines of the doorway. I'd say you're earning your keep so far. A smile crinkled the corners of his eyes. High praise indeed. I'll see you at first light. As Beatrice prepared for bed that night, she found her thoughts constantly returning to her unexpected employee. There was something disarming about Adam Harrington, something that made her carefully constructed defenses feel less necessary. It was dangerous territory for a woman alone. She knew to begin to rely on or trust a man she barely knew. Yet she couldn't deny the small seed of something like hope that had taken root in her heart. The days that followed fell into a pattern that quickly began to feel natural, as if Adam had always been part of the rhythm of the farm. They rose with the sun, worked the fields until midday heat forced them to other tasks, then returned in the cooler evening hours to continue their efforts. Between them, they managed to clear and weed the entire cornfield by the end of the week, a task Beatrice had feared would take her well into the following month. They developed an easy working relationship, learning each other's habits and preferences without needing to discuss them. Adam naturally took on the heavier tasks, repairing fences, clearing irrigation ditches, splitting firewood, while Beatrice tended the small vegetable garden near the house and looked after the few chickens that provided precious eggs. In the evenings, they shared meals and conversation that gradually grew more comfortable and wide-ranging. Beatrice learned that Adam had wandered much of the Western Territories after leaving Missouri, working as a ranch hand, a miner, even briefly as a deputy in a small Kansas town before finding his calling as a drover. He spoke of his experiences without bravado, but his stories revealed a man who had seen much of both the beauty and harshness of the frontier. For her part, Beatrice found herself sharing more than she'd intended about her own life, her childhood on the farm, her mother's increasing unhappiness as the years passed, her father's quiet stoicism in the face of abandonment. She even told Adam about her brief courtship with the son of a neighboring farmer 3 years earlier, a relationship her father had encouraged, but which ended when the young man left to seek his fortune in the gold fields of Dakota Territory. Never even wrote to tell me if he'd struck it rich, she said with forced lightness one evening as they sat on the porch watching the sunset paint the sky in brilliant hues of orange and pink. His loss, Adam said simply, and something in his tone made Beatrice glance at him sharply. He was looking at her with an expression she couldn't quite decipher, something warm and appreciative that made her heart beat a little faster. As the first week of their arrangement drew to a close, Beatrice found herself facing the decision she'd promised whether to keep Adam on permanently. Logically, the answer was clear. His help had been invaluable, his knowledge of farming an unexpected bonus, his company. Well, that was harder to quantify but no less significant, yet doubts lingered. Could she afford to feed another mouth through the winter if the crop failed? Was it wise to become dependent on help that might vanish as suddenly as it had appeared? And most troubling of all, could she trust the growing warmth she felt whenever Adam was near? Or was she simply lonely enough to mistake simple kindness for something more? The decision came to a head on Sunday morning. By unspoken agreement, they had both risen a little later, acknowledging the day of rest. Beatrice had put on her best dress, a simple blue calico that had once belonged to her mother, and was preparing a slightly more elaborate breakfast than usual when Adam appeared at the kitchen door, freshly shaved and wearing a clean shirt she hadn't seen before. "Morning, Miss Newman," he said, his eyes taking in her changed appearance with evident appreciation. "You look lovely today." Beatrice felt a blush warm her cheeks at the simple compliment. "Thank you, I thought, well, it being Sunday and all." "Of course," he nodded, understanding her unfinished thought. "My mother always insisted on our Sunday best, even when there was no church nearby to attend." As they sat down to breakfast, a slightly awkward silence fell between them. Finally, Adam cleared his throat. "It's been a week," he said, meeting her gaze directly. "Time for you to decide if I stay on or move along." Beatrice took a sip of coffee to buy herself a moment. "You've been a great help," she began carefully. "More than I expected, honestly." "But—" Adam prompted, clearly sensing her hesitation. "But I'm still not sure I can afford to keep you on," she admitted. "The crop might fail despite our best efforts. The bank might still foreclose. I'd hate for you to waste your time on a lost cause." Adam set down his fork, his expression serious. "Miss Newman, Beatrice," he said, using her first name for the first time. "I'm a grown man who can decide for himself what constitutes a waste of time. I believe in what we're doing here. I believe this farm can be saved." He paused, his blue eyes intent on hers. "And I believe I'd like to be part of that effort if you'll have me." The sincerity in his voice was unmistakable, making it difficult for Beatrice to maintain her cautious reserve. "Why?" she asked finally. "You could find better paying work elsewhere. Why stay here?" A slight smile played at the corners of his mouth. "Maybe I like the company." The simple statement hung in the air between them, laden with implications neither was quite ready to acknowledge openly. Beatrice found herself unable to look away from his steady gaze, feeling as if she stood on the edge of a precipice, uncertain whether stepping forward would lead to flight or fall. "All right," she said at last, making her decision. "You can stay on. Same arrangements for now, but if the harvest is good, I'll see about proper wages." The smile that spread across Adam's face made something flutter in her chest. "You won't regret it," he said, the same words he'd spoken that first day, but now carrying the weight of a week's worth of shared labor and growing trust. "We'll see," she replied, trying to sound practical despite the warmth blooming within her. "Now eat your breakfast before it gets cold." As they finished their meal in companionable silence, Beatrice couldn't help but wonder if she'd just made the wisest decision of her life, or simply postponed confronting the growing feelings she harbored for Adam Harrington. Only time would tell, and for now she was content to have that time stretch before them, full of possibility. The weeks that followed brought changes to both the farm and to Beatrice herself, subtle shifts that were easy to miss day by day but became evident when she stepped back to consider them. Under their combined care, the corn began to flourish, the stalks growing taller and stronger as June gave way to July. The irrigation system Adam had improved ensured that even when rain was scarce, the crops received adequate water. He had also repaired the chicken coop, allowing Beatrice to acquire more hens from a neighbor, increasing their egg production significantly. But the physical improvements to the farm were only part of the transformation. Beatrice found herself smiling more, laughing at Adam's dry humor, enjoying the simple pleasure of having someone to share the sunset with after a long day's work. Her constant worry began to ease, replaced by a cautious optimism about the farm's prospects and her own. Adam, too, seemed to flourish in his new role. His initial reserve gradually gave way to a more relaxed demeanor as he became comfortable in her home and on her land. He took initiative identifying problems before they became critical and implementing solutions without needing to be directed. He began to speak of we and our farm in a way that should have alarmed Beatrice, but instead gave her a sense of partnership she hadn't realized she craved. One particularly hot afternoon in mid-July, they took a rare break, seeking refuge in the shade of a large cottonwood tree near the creek that ran along the property's eastern boundary. Adam had brought along a canteen of water and some dried apple slices Beatrice had prepared from last year's harvest. "I was thinking," he said as they sat side by side against the tree trunk, "we might want to consider planting winter wheat after the corn harvest. It would give us a spring crop to sell before next year's corn is ready." Beatrice glanced at him, noting his use of us and we, but choosing not to comment on it. "My father tried winter wheat once," she recalled. "Had some success with it, but the next few years were too dry to risk it again." Adam nodded thoughtfully. "With the irrigation improvements, we might have better luck now, worth considering at least." "I suppose it is," Beatrice agreed, touched by his long-term thinking about the farm. It suggested he planned to stay, a prospect that both thrilled and terrified her. They sat in comfortable silence for a while, listening to the gentle gurgle of the creek and the occasional call of a meadowlark. The peaceful moment felt like a gift after weeks of relentless labor. "You know," Adam said finally, his voice thoughtful, "I've worked a lot of places over the years, but I don't think I've ever felt as settled as I do here." Beatrice turned to look at him, struck by the openness of his expression. "Even though you're sleeping in a barn and working for room and board?" she asked, trying to keep her tone light. A smile curved his lips. "Even so. There's something about this place," he paused, his blue eyes meeting hers, "and its owner that feels like somewhere a man could put down roots." The implication in his words and gaze made Beatrice's heart race. They had been dancing around this growing attraction for weeks, neither quite ready to acknowledge it openly. But in that moment, with the summer sun filtering through the leaves above them and the sweet scent of wildflowers in the air, pretense seemed unnecessary. "Adam," she began, uncertain what she wanted to say but feeling the need to say something. Before she could continue, the distant sound of approaching horses interrupted the moment. They both stood quickly, instinctively alert to unexpected visitors. "Were you expecting anyone?" Adam asked, his posture tensing slightly. Beatrice shook her head, squinting toward the main road where a cloud of dust indicated at least 2 riders approaching. "No one." They hurried back toward the house, reaching the front yard just as the riders came into view. 2 men. One in a dark suit that marked him as a town dweller rather than a farmer or rancher, the other in the rough clothes of a working man. "That's Edwin Barker from the bank," Beatrice said in a low voice, recognizing the suited man with a sinking feeling in her stomach. "And I think the other one is Joel Winters. He owns the large spread to the north." Adam nodded, his expression grim. "Any idea what they want?" "Nothing good, I'd wager." They stood side by side as the men rode into the yard and dismounted. Barker, a thin man in his 50s with a pinched expression that seemed permanent, nodded curtly to Beatrice. "Miss Newman," he said, his eyes sliding to Adam with obvious curiosity. "I wasn't aware you had assistants on the property now." "Mr. Harrington is my hired hand," Beatrice replied, lifting her chin slightly. "What brings you out this way, Mr. Barker? Payment isn't due until after harvest." Barker straightened his jacket, a gesture that seemed designed to remind everyone of his position of authority. "Indeed, but I wanted to assess the property's condition personally." His gaze swept over the fields visible from where they stood. "I must admit, things appear more managed than I expected. We've been working hard," Beatrice said, again not correcting his assumption about Adam's status. "Yes, well," Barker cleared his throat. "Mr. Winters here has expressed interest in acquiring this parcel should it become available. He's made a generous offer that would cover your outstanding loan and leave you with a tidy sum besides." Beatrice stiffened, feeling Adam tense beside her as well. She glanced at Winters, a heavyset man with small, calculating eyes who was appraising the farmhouse and outbuildings with obvious interest. "The farm is not for sale," she said firmly. "And as you can see, we're well on our way to a successful harvest that will cover the mortgage payment." Winters spoke up for the first time, his voice deceptively casual. "No offense, Miss Newman, but farming's a man's business. Your pa was a good man, but he's gone now. Why struggle when you could take the money and start fresh somewhere more suitable for a young lady, perhaps find a husband in town?" The condescension in his tone made Beatrice's blood boil, but before she could respond, Adam stepped slightly forward. "Miss Newman is doing just fine managing her own affairs," he said, his voice level but with an underlying steel that Beatrice hadn't heard before. "And as her employee, I can attest that this farm is on solid footing." Winter's eyes narrowed as he sized up Adam. "And who might you be exactly?" "Adam Harrington. I've been working here since early summer." "Convenient timing," Barker commented, his implication clear. "Just appeared when Miss Newman needed help most, did you?" Adam's jaw tightened, but he maintained his composure. "I was looking for honest work. Miss Newman needed an extra pair of hands. It was a mutually beneficial arrangement." "I'm sure it was," Winters said with a smirk that made Beatrice's face flush with anger and embarrassment. "I think you gentlemen have said enough," she stated coldly. "As I've made clear, the farm is not for sale. Now, if you'll excuse us, we have work to do." Barker adjusted his hat, clearly displeased with the reception. "Very well, Miss Newman, but do consider Mr. Winters' offer carefully. The bank expects prompt payment in full when the note comes due. No extensions will be granted this time." "I understand my obligations perfectly," Beatrice replied. The men remounted, Winters taking one last appraising look at the property before tipping his hat with mock politeness. "Think about it, Miss Newman. My offer won't stay open indefinitely." They watched in silence as the two men rode away, dust rising from their horses' hooves. Only when they were well out of sight did Beatrice release the breath she'd been holding, her shoulders sagging slightly. "Vultures," Adam muttered, his gaze still fixed on the road where the men had disappeared. "Winters has been trying to buy this land since before my father died," Beatrice explained, anger and worry warring within her. "He wants to expand his cattle operation." Adam turned to her, his expression serious. "How bad is the situation with the bank?" Beatrice hesitated, then decided he deserved the truth. "The payment due after harvest will clear most of the debt, but there's still next spring's payment to consider." "If the crop fails or sells below expectation?" "It won't," Adam said with quiet confidence. "The corn looks strong, and with two of us to bring it in, we'll get top dollar at market." He placed a hand gently on her shoulder, the contact sending warmth through her despite her troubled thoughts. "We'll make this work, Beatrice, I promise." Looking up into his earnest blue eyes, Beatrice found herself believing him. Against all logic, against the caution that had become second nature since her mother's abandonment, she trusted that together they could save her family's legacy. "Thank you," she said softly, "for being here, for standing with me just now." Adam's hand moved from her shoulder to gently brush a strand of hair from her face, the gesture so tender it made her breath catch. "There's nowhere else I'd rather be," he said simply. In that moment, with the summer sun warm on their faces and the promise of their growing crops stretching before them, Beatrice allowed herself to believe that perhaps her solitary struggle was truly over that in Adam Harrington. She had found not just a farmhand but a partner, a friend, and possibly something more precious still. The weeks following the unwelcome visit from Barker and Winters brought both challenge and change to Beatrice's life. July blazed hot and dry, testing the limits of their irrigation system and requiring constant vigilance to keep the crops from withering under the relentless Wyoming sun. Yet despite the physical demands, Beatrice found herself happier than she had been in years, perhaps happier than she had ever been as an adult. Adam's presence had transformed not just the farm, but her entire outlook. His quiet confidence and unwavering support gave her strength on the days when doubt crept in, while his dry humor and thoughtful conversation filled the evenings that had once stretched endlessly in lonely silence. They fell into an easy rhythm, working side by side during the day, sharing meals and stories at night, gradually building something that felt increasingly like a partnership in all ways that mattered. By early August, the corn stood tall and proud, the first ears beginning to form within their protective husks. The vegetable garden yielded a bounty of fresh produce that allowed Beatrice to can and preserve for the coming winter. Even the chickens seemed more productive, perhaps responding to the improved coop and regular care Adam provided. One particularly beautiful evening, as they sat on the porch watching fireflies dance in the gathering dusk, Adam broached a subject they had been circling for weeks. "I've been thinking," he began, his voice casual though Beatrice could sense an underlying tension, "about making some improvements to that room in the barn." Beatrice glanced at him, noting the careful way he studied the horizon rather than meeting her eyes. "What kind of improvements?" "Better insulation for one. Wyoming winters are harsh, as you well know." He paused, finally turning to look at her. "If I'm to stay on through the winter, that is." The question hung between them, unspoken but clear. They had never discussed arrangements beyond the harvest, though both had begun speaking of future plans for the farm as if Adam's continued presence was assured. "Is that what you want?" Beatrice asked softly. "To stay through winter?" Adam's gaze was steady, honest in a way that made her heart race. "I want to stay, Beatrice, not just through winter." The simple declaration carried weight far beyond the words themselves. Beatrice knew he wasn't just talking about employment, and the realization both thrilled and frightened her. "Adam, you don't need to answer now," he interrupted gently. "I know you've had your trust broken before. I know how hard it is for you to believe someone might stay when others have left." He reached across the space between their chairs, taking her hand in his. "I just wanted you to know where I stand. The rest is up to you in your own time." Beatrice looked down at their joined hands, his large and calloused from years of hard work, her smaller but no less marked by labor. They were hands that matched, she thought suddenly, hands that had found purpose in the same soil. "I want you to stay too," she admitted, her voice barely above a whisper. "I'm just afraid." "Of what?" he prompted when she trailed off. She met his eyes, finding the courage to voice her deepest fear. Of believing in something, someone, only to have it all disappear again. Adam's grip on her hand tightened slightly. "I can't promise the future, Beatrice, no one can, but I can promise that I'm not looking to leave. What I've found here, with you, it's what I've been searching for without knowing it." The sincerity in his voice was unmistakable, and Beatrice felt something within her soften, a wall of protection beginning to crumble. Before she could respond, however, the distant sound of approaching hoofbeats once again interrupted their moment of connection. Both stood, instantly alert. Visitors at this hour were unusual and potentially concerning. "Are you expecting anyone?" Adam asked, echoing the question from weeks earlier. Beatrice shook her head, straining to see through the gathering darkness. As the rider came into view, however, her tension eased slightly. "It's Thomas Bradley," she said, recognizing the young man who ran the general store in town with his father. "Probably bringing the supplies I ordered last week." Adam relaxed as well, though he remained standing protectively at Beatrice's side as Thomas rode into the yard and dismounted. "Evening, Miss Newman," the young man called, tipping his hat. "Mr. Harrington." "Thomas," Beatrice greeted him. "Isn't it a bit late for deliveries?" "Yes, madam, sorry about that," Thomas replied, looking somewhat flustered. "Pa sent me out special when the telegram came in. Said you'd want to know right away." "Telegram?" Beatrice frowned, a flutter of anxiety rising in her chest. "For me," Thomas nodded, reaching into his vest pocket and withdrawing a folded piece of paper. "From Boston, madam." Beatrice felt as if the ground had shifted beneath her feet. Boston could only mean one thing: news of or from her mother, whom she hadn't heard from in 4 years. With slightly trembling hands, she accepted the telegram, aware of Adam's concerned gaze upon her. "Thank you, Thomas," she said, her voice remarkably steady despite her inner turmoil. "Would you like some water before you head back?" "No, thank you, madam. Pa's expecting me back to help close up shop." He hesitated, then added awkwardly, "I hope it's not bad news." Beatrice nodded distractedly, her attention already focused on the folded paper in her hands. She was vaguely aware of Thomas mounting his horse and riding away, of Adam's quiet presence beside her, but all she could think about was what message might have traveled across the country to find her after so many years of silence. "You want some privacy?" Adam asked gently. Beatrice considered for a moment, then shook her head. "No, stay, please." Taking a deep breath, she unfolded the telegram and read the brief message by the fading light of dusk. "Beatrice stop mother gravely ill stop asks for you stop funds wired to Opal Bank for travel stop please. Come stop. Regards Aunt Margaret." Stop. The words blurred before her eyes as unexpected tears formed. Her mother, who had abandoned her and her father without a backward glance, was now ill and asking for her. After years of silence, this impersonal telegram was supposed to bring Beatrice running across the country, leaving behind the farm, the harvest, everything she had worked so hard to preserve. "Beatrice?" Adam's voice was gentle, concerned. "What is it?" She handed him the telegram wordlessly, watching as he read it quickly, his expression growing somber. "Your mother is ill," he stated, not a question but a confirmation, apparently. Beatrice's voice sounded distant to her own ears. After 4 years without a word, she suddenly remembered she has a daughter. Adam carefully refolded the telegram and handed it back to her. "What will you do?" It was the right question, free from judgment or pressure, allowing her the space to process her own complicated feelings. Beatrice moved back to the porch steps and sat down heavily, Adam joining her after a moment. "I don't know," she admitted. "Part of me wants to ignore it, to say she made her choice years ago and now must live with it." She twisted the paper between her fingers. "But another part wonders if you'll regret not going." Adam finished for her. Beatrice nodded, grateful for his understanding. "She's still my mother despite everything, and if she's truly gravely ill." She trailed off, the implications hanging in the air between them. "The harvest is still weeks away," Adam said after a moment of silence. "I could manage it alone if necessary." Beatrice looked at him sharply. "You do that, take responsibility for the entire harvest." "Of course," he replied without hesitation. "The farm would be waiting for you when you returned. I'd make sure of it." The offer touched her deeply, yet it also raised questions neither had addressed directly. "And if I decided not to return?" she asked quietly. "If I chose to stay in Boston?" Adam's expression remained steady, though she could see the subtle tension in his jaw. "Then I'd bring in the harvest, make the bank payment, and decide what to do from there." He paused, then added, "But I don't think that's what you really want, Beatrice." He was right, of course. Despite the complications of maintaining the farm, despite the constant struggle against elements and economics, this land was her home in a way Boston never could be. She had been born here, raised here, had watched her father pour his life into these acres. And now, with Adam beside her, the future seemed full of possibilities she had never dared imagine. "No," she agreed softly. "It's not what I want, but I may need to go, at least briefly." Adam nodded, accepting her decision without question. "Then that's what you'll do. And I'll be here, making sure everything is taken care of until you return." The simple certainty in his voice, the unwavering support without demand or condition, broke through the last of Beatrice's carefully constructed defenses. In that moment, she knew that what she felt for Adam Harrington was no longer just gratitude or friendship or even attraction. It was love, pure and terrifying in its intensity. Acting on impulse, she reached for his hand, twining her fingers with his. "Thank you," she whispered, "for understanding. For being here." Adam's thumb traced gentle circles on the back of her hand, his blue eyes reflecting the first stars appearing in the darkening sky. "Always," he promised, and in that single word, Beatrice found the courage to believe in a future she had never thought possible. The following days were a whirlwind of preparation and emotion. After a sleepless night considering her options, Beatrice had decided she would indeed go to Boston, not out of obligation to the mother who had abandoned her, but to seek the closure she had never received. She would face her mother one final time, resolve the unfinished business between them, and return to Wyoming with a lighter heart, ready to embrace the future that awaited her there. Adam supported her decision completely, helping her make arrangements for the journey while continuing their work on the farm. He rode into town to confirm that funds had indeed been wired to the bank as the telegram stated. and returned with enough money for Beatrice's train ticket to Boston and back, with some to spare for expenses. "Your aunt seems to have been generous," he commented as Beatrice carefully counted the unfamiliar Eastern banknotes. "Have you ever met her?" Beatrice shook her head. "Never. She's my mother's sister." "From what little Ma told me, Aunt Margaret married well and lives in one of those grand houses on Beacon Hill." She frowned slightly, uncomfortable with accepting money from a stranger, even a relative. "I'll pay her back somehow." Adam didn't argue, understanding her pride too well to suggest she simply accept the gift. Instead, he focused on practical matters, what needed to be done on the farm during her absence, when she should leave to catch the eastbound train from Cheyenne, how they would communicate while she was away. The night before her departure, they sat at the kitchen table after supper, reviewing final details. Beatrice would ride to Opal with Adam the next morning, where the stagecoach would take her to the railway station in Cheyenne. From there, it would be a 5-day journey to Boston with changes in Chicago and New York. "I've never been farther east than Laramie," Beatrice admitted, anxiety coloring her voice despite her determination. "I've certainly never traveled alone." "You'll be fine," Adam assured her, his confidence in her abilities unwavering. "You're the strongest person I know, Beatrice Newman. A train journey won't defeat you." She smiled at his faith in her, though her stomach still churned with nerves. It wasn't just the journey that concerned her, but what and who awaited at its end. What state would she find her mother in? What could possibly be said after years of silence that would heal the wounds of abandonment? And beneath these immediate worries lay a deeper fear that once she left the farm, something would prevent her return. That, like her mother before her, she would be swept away by circumstances beyond her control, leaving behind unfinished business and broken hearts. As if sensing the direction of her thoughts, Adam reached across the table and took her hand. "You will come back," he said simply, his blue eyes holding her steadily, "and I'll be here waiting." In that moment, Beatrice made a decision she had been approaching gradually over the past weeks. Rising from her chair without releasing his hand, she moved around the table until she stood beside him, her heart pounding so loudly she was certain he must hear it. "Adam," she said softly, gathering her courage, "before I go, there's something I need to say." He stood as well, their bodies close in the lamplight. "What is it?" Beatrice took a deep breath, knowing that once spoken, these words could never be taken back. "I love you," she said simply. "I don't know exactly when it happened, but I know it's true. And I needed you to know before I leave in case don't," he interrupted gently, raising a hand to cup her cheek. "There are no in-case scenarios, Beatrice. You're coming back and I'll be here." His thumb traced the line of her cheekbone, his touch sending shivers through her. "And I love you too. Have almost from the first moment I saw you, stubborn and proud in your father's fields." The declaration, spoken so plainly and with such certainty, filled Beatrice with a joy so intense it was almost painful. For so long, she had convinced herself that love was not meant for her, that she was destined for solitude and struggle. Yet here stood this man, this remarkable man who had appeared in her life like an answered prayer, offering her not just his help but his heart. When Adam lowered his head to kiss her, it felt like the most natural thing in the world. His lips were warm and gentle against hers, the contact both a question and an answer. Beatrice responded with all the emotion she had kept contained for so long, her arms circling his neck as she pressed closer, feeling the solid strength of him against her. The kiss deepened, months of unspoken longing finding expression in this moment of connection. Adam's arms encircled her waist, holding her as if she were precious, irreplaceable. When they finally broke apart, both breathless, he rested his forehead against hers, his eyes closed as if memorizing the sensation. "I've wanted to do that for a very long time," he murmured, his voice rough with emotion. "Why didn't you?" Beatrice asked, her own voice barely above a whisper. Adam opened his eyes, the blue darkened with feeling. "Because you needed to be ready, because I wanted you to be sure. Because some things are worth waiting for." The simple honesty of his answer moved her deeply. This was a man who understood patience, who recognized the value in allowing feelings to develop naturally rather than rushing toward gratification. It was yet another quality that set him apart from others she had known. "I'm sure now," she said, reaching up to touch his face, tracing the line of the scar along his jaw. "More sure than I've ever been of anything." They stood together in the quiet kitchen, the single lamp casting a warm glow around them, creating an island of light in the darkness. Outside, the vast Wyoming sky was scattered with stars, the same stars that had witnessed generations of hope and heartbreak, beginnings and endings, partings and reunions. "When you return," Adam said, his hands still resting at her waist, "we should discuss the future, our future." The implication was clear, and Beatrice felt her heart swell with happiness even as anxiety about the coming journey still lingered. "Yes," she agreed, "we should." They kissed again, more gently this time, a promise sealed without words. And later, when Adam reluctantly departed for his room in the barn, Beatrice stood at the window watching his retreating figure, knowing that whatever awaited her in Boston, her heart would remain here in this place, with this man who had taught her to believe in love again. The journey east was every bit as daunting as Beatrice had anticipated, yet also unexpectedly enlightening. As the landscape outside the train windows gradually transformed from the rugged terrain of Wyoming and Nebraska to the rolling farmlands of Iowa and Illinois, then to the more densely populated regions of the eastern states, Beatrice found herself experiencing a strange mixture of curiosity and homesickness. Chicago overwhelmed her with its noise and crowds, making her appreciate for the first time the vast open spaces of her home. New York was even more intimidating, a cacophony of sounds and smells and hurrying people that made her head spin. By the time she boarded the final train to Boston, Beatrice was both exhausted and exhilarated, her perspective on the world irrevocably expanded. A telegraph from Adam awaited her at the station in New York, its brief message a balm to her travel-weary spirit. "All well here, stop crops thriving, stop missing you, stop Adam." She had clutched the paper tightly as she navigated the unfamiliar city, drawing strength from the knowledge that he was thinking of her, waiting for her. Boston, when she finally arrived, was both exactly as her mother had described it and completely different. The elegant buildings and tree-lined streets spoke of wealth and permanence, so unlike the rough-hewn structures of Opal. Yet there was a coldness to the city that surprised her, a sense of reserve in the people she encountered that made her long for the straightforward manner of her Wyoming neighbors. Aunt Margaret, who met her at the station in a fine carriage, embodied this contradiction. Her greeting was perfectly proper, her appearance impeccable in a fashionable burgundy dress that made Beatrice acutely aware of her own travel-worn attire. Yet there was genuine warmth in her eyes as she embraced her niece. "You look so much like a leaner at your age," she commented as they rode through the streets toward Beacon Hill. "It's quite remarkable." Beatrice, who had rarely been compared to her mother, didn't know how to respond to this observation. "How is she?" she asked instead, addressing the reason for her long journey. Aunt Margaret's expression sobered. "Not well, I'm afraid. The doctors call it consumption. She has good days and bad, but the overall trajectory is." She trailed off, then added more gently, "She's very eager to see you, Beatrice. She speaks of little else since receiving word you were coming." The elegant townhouse on Beacon Hill, where her mother had been living for the past 4 years, was everything Beatrice had imagined from childhood stories, and everything her simple farmhouse was not. Marble floors, crystal chandeliers, fine paintings in ornate frames, furniture upholstered in silks and velvets, it was like stepping into another world, one where the daily struggle for survival was replaced by concerns of fashion and social standing. Her mother's room, however, cut through the grandeur with stark reality. Beatrice Newman, though she had reverted to her maiden name, Carpenter, upon returning east lay pale and thin against crisp white pillows, her once beautiful face now gaunt, her breathing labored. When Beatrice entered the room, her mother's eyes, still the same striking blue she remembered, filled with tears. "Beatrice," she whispered, extending a thin hand, "you came." The complex emotions Beatrice had carried across the country, anger, resentment, hurt, curiosity, momentarily receded in the face of her mother's obvious illness. She moved to the bedside and took the offered hand, surprised at how fragile it felt. "Hello, Mother," she said, her voice steady despite the turmoil within. Their conversation that first day was cautious, focused on safe topics: Beatrice's journey, the changes in Boston since Alina had been a girl, brief updates on the farm. It was only on the second day, when they were alone together in the late afternoon sunlight that streamed through the lace curtains, that Alina finally addressed the elephant in the room. "I owe you an explanation," she began, her voice weak but determined. "And an apology, though I know it comes far too late." Beatrice, seated in a chair beside the bed, felt her heart rate increase. This was the moment she had simultaneously dreaded and longed for, the reckoning that might finally allow her to understand why her mother had chosen to leave. "I'm listening," she said simply. Alina looked out the window for a long moment before turning back to her daughter. "I was never meant for the life I led in Wyoming," she said finally. "The isolation, the hardship, the constant struggle, it wore me down year by year until I scarcely recognized myself anymore. Father worked hard to make things comfortable for you," Beatrice pointed out, unable to keep a hint of defensiveness from her tone. "Yes, he did," Alina acknowledged. "Your father was a good man, Beatrice, better than I deserved, but he loved the land in a way I never could. For him, the struggle was worthwhile because he believed in what he was building." She paused, her breath catching slightly. "For me, it was merely endurance with no end in sight." Beatrice remained silent, allowing her mother to continue at her own pace. "I told myself I was staying for you, that a child needed her mother," Alina went on. "But as you grew older, I saw how much like your father you were, how you thrived in that environment that was slowly killing my spirit." A tear slipped down her hollow cheek. "I convinced myself you would be better off without my constant unhappiness poisoning your home. So you just left," Beatrice said, the hurt she had carried for 8 years evident in her voice. "No goodbye, just a letter." Alina closed her eyes briefly, pain crossing her features that had nothing to do with her physical illness. "I was a coward," she admitted. "I knew if I tried to say goodbye to you in person, I might not find the strength to leave, and I had to leave, Beatrice. I truly believed I would die there, whether by illness or by my own hand." The stark admission hung in the air between them, shocking in its honesty. Beatrice had never considered that her mother's unhappiness had run so deep, had never understood the depth of desperation that might drive a woman to abandon her family. "Why did you stop writing?" she asked after a moment, her voice softer now, Alina's expression clouded with shame. "At first, because your father's responses were so brief, so formal, I told myself he was preventing you from writing to me." She shook her head slightly. "Later, I realized he was simply protecting you both from further pain, and then I met someone, a widower with grown children. He offered me a life I had thought was forever beyond my reach." "You were married?" Beatrice asked, surprised this detail hadn't been mentioned. "No," Alina replied, a fresh wave of sadness washing over her features. "We were engaged, but Charles died suddenly last year, a heart attack." She gestured weakly around the room. "His children honored his wishes that I be allowed to stay here in what would have been our home." Another tear slipped down her cheek. "By then, I was already ill and too ashamed to reach out after so long a silence." The conversation exhausted Alina, and soon the nurse insisted Beatrice leave to allow her mother to rest. Over the next several days, they continued to talk, gradually rebuilding a fragile connection. Alina asked about the farm, about how Beatrice had managed after her father's death, expressing both surprise and pride when her daughter described her determination to save the family land. It was nearly a week into her stay when Beatrice finally mentioned Adam. "There's someone helping me now," she said, watching her mother's reaction carefully. "A man named Adam Harrington. He came looking for work just when I needed it most." Something in her tone must have revealed more than her words, because Alina's eyes sharpened with interest. "And is he merely an employee, this Adam?" Beatrice felt a blush warm her cheeks. "He's important to me," she admitted. "Very important." A small smile touched Alina's pale lips. "You love him," she stated simply. "Yes," Beatrice confirmed, the single word carrying the weight of certainty. "I do." Eleanor studied her daughter's face for a long moment. "Does he make you happy, Beatrice? Truly happy, he does," Beatrice replied without hesitation. "He understands me in a way I never thought possible. He sees the value in the things I value. He makes me believe that the struggles are worthwhile because we face them together." A shadow crossed Eleanor's features, perhaps a recognition of what had been missing in her own marriage. "Then hold on to that," she advised softly. "It's rarer than you know." As days turned to weeks, Beatrice found herself settling into an unexpected routine in Boston. Mornings were spent with her mother, whose condition fluctuated but showed a general decline despite the best medical care. Afternoons often included outings with Aunt Margaret, who seemed determined to show her niece the cultural attractions of the city museums, libraries, even the occasional shopping expedition for more suitable clothing than Beatrice had brought with her. Through it all, Beatrice exchanged regular telegrams with Adam, brief messages that bridged the vast distance between them. His reports were consistently positive: the crops developing well, preparations for harvest underway, everything proceeding according to plan. His final words were always the same: "Missing you, stop, hurry home, stop," and Beatrice did long for home with an intensity that surprised her. Despite the comforts and cultural advantages of Boston, despite reconnecting with her mother and forming a tentative bond with her aunt, she found herself dreaming of Wyoming's vast skies and open spaces. Most of all, she dreamed of Adam, his smile, his voice, the feeling of security she had found in his embrace. By the third week, it became clear that Eleanor's condition was deteriorating more rapidly than the doctors had predicted. She grew weaker by the day, her breathing more labored, her periods of consciousness briefer. During one such lucid moment, she reached for Beatrice's hand with surprising strength. "You need to go home," she said, her voice barely above a whisper. Beatrice shook her head. "I'm not leaving you, not now." A ghost of a smile touched Eleanor's lips. "So stubborn, just like your father." She paused to catch her breath. "The harvest will be starting soon. Your farm needs you. Your Adam needs you." "But listen to me, Beatrice," Eleanor interrupted, her blue eyes intense despite her weakness. "I've kept you from your home long enough, first by leaving, now by asking you to come. It was selfish of me." "No, Mother," Beatrice protested. "I needed to come. We needed this time." Eleanor nodded slightly. "Yes, we did, and I'm grateful for every minute, but I won't have you miss your harvest because of me. I won't be responsible for you losing what you've worked so hard to preserve." Beatrice felt tears welling in her eyes. "I can't just leave you to die alone," she whispered. "I'm not alone," Eleanor assured her, glancing toward the door where Aunt Margaret could be seen talking with the doctor. "Margaret has been more sister to me these past years than in all our childhood. She'll be here." She squeezed Beatrice's hand weakly. "And knowing you're where you belong, with the man you love, building the life you've chosen, that will bring me more peace than your presence at my bedside." They spoke for a while longer, making peace with the past and blessing each other's futures in ways neither had thought possible when Beatrice first arrived. By the time Eleanor drifted back to sleep, exhausted by the conversation, Beatrice had made her decision. She would return to Wyoming, to the harvest, to Adam, carrying with her not just the closure she had sought but a deeper understanding of her mother and, consequently, herself. The following morning, she made arrangements for her journey home, grateful for Aunt Margaret's help in securing train tickets on such short notice. On her final night in Boston, as she sat by her sleeping mother's bedside, Beatrice wrote a long letter to leave behind expressing forgiveness, love, and gratitude for the reconciliation they had found in these precious weeks together. When she boarded the westbound train 2 days later, her heart was heavy with the knowledge that she would likely never see her mother again in this life. Yet alongside the grief ran a current of peace, of completion, that allowed her to turn her face toward home with hope rather than regret. The journey west seemed both endless and swift, each mile bringing her closer to the life and love awaiting her in Wyoming. As the landscape outside the train windows gradually transformed from the crowded eastern cities to the open prairies, and finally to the rugged beauty of the western territories, Beatrice felt as if she were shedding layers of tension she hadn't realized she was carrying. Her final telegraph to Adam had been sent from Chicago. Arriving Cheyenne stop September 15 stop afternoon train stop Beatrice. She had no way of knowing if he had received it in time, if he would be able to meet her, or if she would need to find her own way back to Opal and the farm. The uncertainty should have worried her, but instead she found herself filled with a strange calm, a certainty that whatever awaited her would be right simply because it brought her closer to home. The Cheyenne station was bustling when her train finally pulled in, passengers disembarking into the golden light of late afternoon. Beatrice gathered her small valise now containing a few new items Aunt Margaret had insisted on purchasing for her and stepped onto the platform, scanning the crowd for a familiar face. For a moment, she thought perhaps her message had indeed arrived too late. Then the sea of people seemed to part, and there he was, Adam, standing tall among the crowd, his blue eyes searching until they found hers. The smile that spread across his face was like sunrise after the longest night, and Beatrice felt her heart soar at the sight of him. She moved toward him without conscious thought, as natural as breathing, and when his arms closed around her, she finally felt the rightness she had been seeking since the day she left. They held each other tightly, oblivious to the bustle of the station around them, lost in the simple joy of reunion. "You're really here," Adam murmured against her hair, his voice rough with emotion. "I was half afraid something would keep you in Boston." Beatrice pulled back just enough to look up into his face, drinking in the beloved features she had carried in her heart across the continent. "Nothing could have kept me from coming home to you," she said simply. The warmth in his eyes at her words made her breath catch. Without hesitation, he lowered his head and kissed her, right there on the crowded platform, a gesture of love and claim that would have scandalized Boston society but felt perfectly right in this moment, in this place. When they finally broke apart, both a little breathless, Adam tucked her hand into the crook of his arm and led her toward the exit. "I have the wagon outside," he explained. "We can make it partway to Opal before dark, then camp and finish the journey tomorrow." As they left the station and approached the waiting wagon, Beatrice noticed it was loaded with supplies, not just her trunk, which he must have collected from the baggage car, but also crates of goods from town. "Did you just arrive today as well?" she asked, curious about his timing. Adam helped her up to the seat before climbing up beside her. "No, I've been in Cheyenne for 2 days," he admitted as he took up the reins. "Your telegram was delayed and I didn't want to risk missing you." The revelation touched her deeply, the thought of him waiting patiently, perhaps anxiously, not knowing exactly when she would arrive but determined to be there when she did. As they pulled away from the station and headed west, the late afternoon sun casting long shadows across the rolling landscape, Beatrice felt a sense of rightness settle over her. This was where she belonged, under this vast sky, beside this remarkable man, heading toward the home they would build together. "Tell me about your mother," Adam said gently as they traveled, giving her the space to share as much or as little as she wished. Beatrice did, finding comfort in describing the reconciliation she had found with Alina, the understanding that had grown between them, and the peaceful parting they had managed despite the knowledge it would likely be their last. "She gave me her blessing," Beatrice concluded, her voice soft with memory, "for the farm, for my choices, for—" She hesitated, then added, "for us." Adam's hand found hers on the seat between them, his grip warm and reassuring. "I'm glad," he said simply. "For your sake, mostly, but for hers as well. It sounds like she found some peace before the end." They rode in companionable silence for a while, the rhythm of the horses' hooves a soothing backdrop to Beatrice's thoughts. As the sun began to dip toward the horizon, painting the sky in brilliant oranges and pinks, Adam cleared his throat slightly. "While you were gone," he began, a hint of nervousness in his tone that caught Beatrice's attention, "I had a lot of time to think, about the farm, about the future. And—" She prompted when he paused. He glanced at her, then back at the road ahead. "And I realized that I've never been more certain of what I want than I am right now." He pulled the wagon to a stop at the crest of a small rise where the view stretched out before them in a tapestry of late summer colors. Setting the brake, he turned to face her fully. "I want you, Beatrice. I want us together, building something that will last." Beatrice's heart raced as she recognized the gravity of the moment. "I want that too," she said softly. Adam reached into his pocket and withdrew a small object that caught the dying sunlight. "I'm not a wealthy man," he said, his voice steady despite the emotion Beatrice could see in his eyes. "Can't offer you fancy things or an easy life, but everything I am, everything I have, everything I hope to be, it's yours if you'll have me." He opened his hand to reveal a simple gold band with a small, perfect pearl set into it. "It was my mother's," he explained. "The only thing of value I kept when I left Missouri. She said to give it to the woman who captured my heart completely." His blue eyes held hers, vulnerable yet certain. "Beatrice Newman, will you marry me?" Though she had begun to hope for this moment during the long journey home, the reality of it still took her breath away. In Adam's steady gaze, she saw everything she had ever wanted without knowing it: a partner who understood her strengths and weaknesses, who valued the same things she valued, who would stand beside her through whatever challenges life presented. "Yes," she whispered, then more strongly, "Yes, Adam Harrington, I will marry you." The smile that broke across his face was like sunshine after rain. With hands that trembled slightly, he slipped the ring onto her finger where it fit as if made for her. Then he gathered her into his arms, sealing their promise with a kiss that spoke of devotion, passion, and a future filled with possibility. They camped that night beneath the vast Wyoming sky, a makeshift supper shared beside a small fire, their conversation flowing easily as they bridged the weeks of separation. Adam told her about the farm, how the corn was nearly ready for harvest, how the new irrigation system had worked perfectly through the dry spell in August, how he had begun repairs on the barn roof in preparation for winter. "And Barker, Winters?" Beatrice asked, remembering the unwelcome visitors who had tried to pressure her into selling. A smile tugged at the corner of Adam's mouth. "Barker rode out once while you were gone, seemed surprised to find me still there working your land. I made it clear the farm wasn't for sale and would be fully operational for the foreseeable future." His expression grew more serious. "Winters hasn't shown his face, but I've heard rumors in town that he's been having trouble with his cattle operation. Overextended himself buying up neighboring properties." "Good," Beatrice said with a touch of fierceness. "Perhaps he'll learn that some things aren't for sale, no matter the price." Adam's gaze warmed as he looked at her across the fire. "Some things are beyond price," he agreed quietly. They reached the farm by mid-afternoon the next day. As they crested the final rise and the familiar buildings came into view, Beatrice felt a wave of emotion wash over her. The golden fields stretched before them, the corn standing tall and proud, ready for harvest. The farmhouse, with its weathered boards and sagging porch, had never looked so beautiful to her eyes. "Welcome home," Adam said softly as the wagon rolled into the yard. Home. The word had taken on new meaning now. It wasn't just the land or the buildings, but the man beside her, the life they would build together, the dreams they would pursue as one. The harvest began 3 days later. Adam and Beatrice working side by side from dawn till dusk, their efforts complemented by neighboring farmers who came to help as part of the traditional harvest exchange. The yield was better than Beatrice had dared hope, the quality excellent thanks to the careful tending the crop had received. When they delivered the first wagons to market in Opal, the price offered exceeded their expectations, ensuring that the mortgage payment would be met with money to spare. They were married on the first Sunday of October, a simple ceremony in the small church in Opal, attended by the neighbors who had become Beatrice's surrogate family in the years since her mother's departure. The minister spoke of partnership and devotion, of two becoming one while each remaining whole in themselves, words that resonated deeply with both bride and groom. Beatrice wore a new dress of pale blue, a gift from Aunt Margaret that had arrived by post just in time for the ceremony, with her mother's lace handkerchief tucked into her sleeve, a tangible connection to the woman who had given her life, but would never see the happiness she had found. Adam stood tall and proud in a new shirt and clean denims, his weathered face solemn as he spoke his vows, yet alight with joy, as he slipped a simple gold band onto Beatrice's finger to join the pearl engagement ring. A letter arrived from Boston 2 weeks after the wedding, bearing Aunt Margaret's elegant handwriting but containing news Beatrice had been both expecting and dreading. Eleanor had passed peacefully in her sleep the day after Beatrice's telegram announcing her safe return to Wyoming had been received. She left this world content in the knowledge that you were home and happy, Margaret wrote. Her final words were of blessing for you and your new husband. The news brought tears, but not the devastating grief Beatrice might have felt without their reconciliation. She mourned her mother with a new understanding of the complex woman she had been, appreciating now both her strengths and weaknesses with the perspective that only forgiveness could bring. Adam held her as she cried, offering comfort without platitudes, his steady presence a reminder that she was no longer alone in her sorrows or her joys. As autumn deepened toward winter, they settled into the rhythm of married life with a naturalness that made it seem as if they had always been together. The small room in the barn was abandoned as Adam took his rightful place in the farmhouse, in Beatrice's life, in her heart. Together, they planned for the future improvements to the farm, crops for the coming year, dreams of children to fill the quiet rooms with laughter. One crisp November evening, as they sat before the fire in the parlor, Beatrice sorting through seed catalogs while Adam whittled a small wooden horse, she was struck by the simple contentment of the moment. Here was the peace she had sought without knowing it, the companionship her mother had never found with her father, the partnership of equals that made the hardships of frontier life not just bearable but meaningful. "What are you thinking?" Adam asked, noting her thoughtful expression. Beatrice smiled, setting aside the catalog to move closer to him on the settee. "I was thinking about the day you arrived," she said, leaning against his solid warmth. "How you just walked into the field and started helping without being asked, how annoyed I was at first." Adam chuckled, his arm coming around her shoulders naturally. "You were a sight to behold, all fierce independence and determination, despite being clearly exhausted." He pressed a kiss to her temple. "I knew right then I'd found something special, though I had no idea just how special." "When did you know?" she asked curiously. "That you loved me, I mean." Adam considered the question seriously, his hand absently stroking her arm. "I think it was that evening after Barker and Winters came when you stood up to them so proudly." A smile touched his lips. "You were magnificent, tired and worried, but absolutely refusing to be intimidated. I remember thinking that a woman like that was worth fighting for, worth staying for." Beatrice tilted her face up to his. "I'm glad you stayed," she whispered. "I'm glad you saw something worth fighting for when I could barely see it myself." "Best decision I ever made," he replied, lowering his head to kiss her with a tenderness that still took her breath away. Outside, the first snow of the season began to fall, delicate flakes drifting past the window to blanket the world in pristine white. Inside, the fire crackled warmly, casting a golden glow over the room where two people who had once been alone now found completion in each other. The journey that had begun with a stranger joining a solitary woman in the fields had led them here to love, to home, to the promise of a future filled with challenge and joy in equal measure. As Adam deepened the kiss, Beatrice knew with absolute certainty that whatever the years ahead might bring, they would face it together, their love a harvest more precious than any crop, more enduring than any hardship, more sustaining than anything she had ever known. In the spring of 1877, the Newman farm, now the Newman Harrington farm, as Adam had insisted Beatrice's family name be honored alongside his burst into life with renewed vigor. The winter had been harsh but not devastating, and the couple had used the quiet months to plan carefully for the coming year. With the bank payment secured from the previous harvest and a small surplus set aside for emergencies, they faced the planting season with cautious optimism. Adam had spent the winter making improvements to the farmhouse and outbuildings, reinforcing the barn roof, adding insulation to the north wall of the house, constructing new shelving in the root cellar to better organize their stored provisions. Beatrice had devoted hours to mending, canning, and planning the garden expansion that would give them greater self-sufficiency in the coming year. They worked as a seamless team, each contributing their strengths to their shared enterprise. Adam's practical knowledge of farming techniques complemented Beatrice's intimate understanding of the specific challenges of their land. Together, they made decisions that neither would have arrived at alone, creating a partnership that was already becoming the envy of neighboring farms. News from Boston continued to arrive periodically, with Aunt Margaret maintaining a correspondence that surprised and touched Beatrice. The older woman seemed genuinely interested in their life, sending not just letters but occasional packages containing small luxuries, coffee, tea, a length of fine fabric that Beatrice transformed into curtains for their bedroom, books that they read aloud to each other during long winter evenings. In early April, as they prepared the fields for planting, Beatrice made a discovery that would change their lives forever. The persistent fatigue she had attributed to the demands of spring work, the subtle changes in her body she had tried to ignore, they could no longer be denied. With equal parts terror and delight, she realized she was carrying Adam's child. She told him one evening as they walked along the creek, the water running high with spring melt, the first wildflowers beginning to dot the banks with color. His reaction was everything she could have hoped for, initial shock giving way to a joy so profound it brought tears to his eyes as he gathered her in his arms, his hands gentle, as if she had suddenly become infinitely precious and fragile. "Are you certain?" he asked, his voice hushed with wonder. Beatrice nodded, her own eyes swimming. "As certain as I can be. If my calculations are right, the baby should arrive in late November." "A winter child," Adam murmured, his hand moving to rest lightly over her still flat stomach. "Our child, Beatrice." The awe in his voice matched her own feelings exactly, that they had created something miraculous together, a new life that would carry forward the best of both of them. Yet alongside the joy ran a current of anxiety that she couldn't entirely suppress. "I'm a little afraid," she admitted quietly. "My mother had such difficulties, and out here so far from proper medical care." Adam's arms tightened around her. "We'll take every precaution," he promised. "I'll make sure you have the best care available, even if I have to ride to Cheyenne to find a doctor." His blue eyes held hers steadily. "But you're strong, Beatrice, stronger than you know, and this child will have the most remarkable mother any little one could ask for." His confidence bolstered her own, as it had so many times since his arrival in her life. Together, they would face this new challenge as they had faced all others, with determination, resourcefulness, and the unshakable bond that had grown between them. The months that followed were a delicate balance of preparation and practical necessity. Though Adam tried to shield Beatrice from the more strenuous farm tasks, she insisted on continuing to contribute in ways that didn't risk her health or the baby's. They compromised, with Beatrice focusing more on the household and garden while Adam took on the heavier fieldwork, occasionally hiring one of the neighbor boys to help with particularly demanding tasks. Word of their expected child spread quickly through the small community around Opal, bringing an outpouring of support that touched them deeply. Women from neighboring farms visited with gifts of handmade baby clothes and practical advice. Men offered Adam extra help with harvest preparations, understanding the additional pressure he faced in providing for his growing family. Even Mr. Hendricks at the general store showed his goodwill, extending their credit limit slightly for necessities for the little one, and setting aside special orders of fabric and supplies that might be difficult to obtain later in Beatrice's pregnancy, when travel would be more challenging. Summer brought both blessing and challenge. The crops thrived under their careful tending, promising another successful harvest. But the heat was oppressive, particularly for Beatrice, as her body changed to accommodate the growing child. Adam insisted on installing a new pump closer to the house to reduce her need to carry water, and constructed a shaded arbor where she could sit and work during the hottest part of the day. By August, Beatrice's condition was unmistakable, her slender form now gracefully rounded with the child she carried. Adam found her more beautiful than ever, a sentiment he expressed not just in words but in countless small gestures: a wildflower picked on his way in from the fields, a footstool positioned perfectly by her favorite chair, a gentle massage of her aching back after a long day. Their love deepened during this time of anticipation, evolving from the initial passion of new romance to something more profound, a steady flame that warmed their home and illuminated their future. They spoke often of the child to come, sharing hopes and dreams, making plans for education and opportunities they had not had themselves. "Boy or girl, this child will know both books and soil," Adam declared one evening as they sat on the porch swing he had built that spring. "Will understand both the value of learning and the dignity of labor." Beatrice nodded, her hand resting on the swell of her abdomen where their child sometimes kicked with surprising vigor. "And will know without question that they are loved," she added softly, "completely and unconditionally." It was a vow born of their own experiences, Adam's early loss of parents who had loved him well, Beatrice's complicated relationship with a mother who had struggled to express affection within the constraints of her own unhappiness. Their child would never doubt belonging, would never question their place in the world or in their parents' hearts. Harvest came earlier than usual that year, a blessing given Beatrice's advancing pregnancy. The yield was excellent, even better than the previous year, allowing them to pay off the remaining mortgage in full and still have funds to invest in further improvements to the farm. The moment when Adam returned from town with the bank draft marked "paid in full" was one of pure triumph, a vindication of all they had worked for together. "Your father would be proud," Adam said as Beatrice traced the words on the document with trembling fingers. "You've secured his legacy just as you promised." "We secured it," she corrected, looking up at him with eyes bright with unshed tears. "I couldn't have done this without you, Adam." He pulled her into his arms, careful of her rounded belly. "Perhaps not," he acknowledged. "But you would have tried, and that determination is what I love most about you." As autumn painted the landscape in golds and russets, they prepared in earnest for the baby's arrival. Adam transformed a corner of their bedroom into a nursery area, crafting a beautiful wooden cradle from cherry wood he had specifically ordered from Cheyenne. Beatrice sewed tiny garments in the evenings, each stitch a prayer for the child who would wear them. They had arranged for Mrs. Tompkins, a local woman known for her midwifery skills, to attend the birth. She visited regularly in those final weeks, checking Beatrice's progress and offering reassurance that everything appeared normal and healthy. "Strong heartbeat, good position," she pronounced during her visit in early November. "This baby knows what it's doing, even if you two are new at this game." Her practical confidence was comforting, though nothing could entirely eliminate the anxiety that naturally accompanied first-time parenthood, especially on the frontier where medical complications could quickly become life-threatening. The first snow fell on November 18th, earlier than expected but light enough not to cause concern. Beatrice stood at the window watching the flakes drift down, one hand supporting her lower back where a dull ache had been present most of the day. Adam came up behind her, his arms encircling her expanded waistline as he rested his chin on her shoulder. "Beautiful, isn't it?" he murmured. "Our first winter as true owners of this land, no bank holding paper over our heads." Beatrice leaned back against him, taking comfort in his solid strength. "First of many," she replied, then gasped slightly as a sharper pain radiated across her abdomen. Adam tensed immediately. "Beatrice, what is it?" She took a deep breath as the pain subsided. I think it might be time to send for Mrs. Tompkins." The next 12 hours were a blur of pain, determination, fear, and ultimately wonder. Adam rode through the snow to fetch the midwife, then paced the kitchen floor like the proverbial expectant father, alternating between making coffee he didn't drink and stepping outside to check on the livestock that needed no checking. Mrs. Tompkins took charge with calm efficiency, directing Beatrice through the stages of labor with a perfect balance of firmness and compassion. "You're doing fine, girl," she repeated as the hours stretched on. "Strong as an ox and twice as stubborn. This baby's lucky to have you for a mother." Just as dawn was breaking on November 19th, with the new day painting the snow-covered landscape in shades of pink and gold, Beatrice gave a final tremendous push, and their child slipped into the world with a lusty cry that rang through the farmhouse like music. "A boy," Mrs. Tompkins announced triumphantly. A fine, strong boy. When Adam was finally allowed into the room, he found Beatrice propped against pillows, exhausted but radiant, a small bundle cradled in her arms. He approached almost reverently, his usual confidence replaced by a tender uncertainty as he gazed upon his son for the first time. "He's perfect," he whispered, carefully sitting on the edge of the bed. "Absolutely perfect." Beatrice smiled up at him, her eyes filled with a love that encompassed both her husband and the new life they had created together. "Would you like to hold him?" With hands that trembled slightly, Adam accepted the swaddled infant, marveling at how something so small could feel so significant. The baby's eyes, a deep newborn blue that might or might not remain that color, blinked open briefly as if to inspect this new person in his world. "Hello, son," Adam said softly. "I'm your father." The simple declaration, spoken with such wonder and commitment, brought fresh tears to Beatrice's eyes. This was what she had wanted without knowing it, what she had never dared to hope for during those lonely months after her father's death. Not just survival, but this: family, belonging, love that created and nurtured new life. "What shall we name him?" she asked, though they had discussed possibilities extensively during the pregnancy. Adam looked from the baby to his wife, his expression soft with emotion. "What about James?" he suggested. "After your father," the thoughtfulness of the gesture touched Beatrice deeply. "James Adam Harrington," she said, trying the full name aloud. "A good, strong name for a good, strong boy." "James Adam Harrington," Adam repeated, sealing their decision. He leaned down to press a gentle kiss to his son's forehead, then another, equally gentle, to his wife's lips. "Thank you," he murmured, "for this gift beyond price." As the winter sunlight streamed through the window, illuminating the small family gathered on the bed, Beatrice felt a sense of completion that transcended even the joy of saving the farm or the security of paying off the mortgage. Here, in this moment, with her husband and newborn son, she had found home in its truest sense, not just a place, but a belonging, a certainty that wherever they were together, they were exactly where they were meant to be. Little James thrived despite the harsh Wyoming winter, growing stronger and more alert with each passing day. He had his father's blue eyes and his mother's determined chin, a combination that made both parents predict he would be a force to be reckoned with once he gained mobility. For now, though, he was content to be the center of their world, his needs and schedule dictating the rhythm of farm life more surely than the changing seasons. Adam proved to be a natural father, as comfortable cradling his son while Beatrice prepared meals as he was tending to the livestock in the bitter cold. He spoke to James constantly, explaining farm operations, reading aloud from books, singing old trail songs from his cowboy days. Beatrice often paused in her work to watch them together, her heart full at the sight of these two who had given her life meaning beyond mere survival. Spring came late but gloriously that year, the land bursting into vibrant life after months beneath snow. As the days lengthened and warmed, Beatrice gradually resumed more of her previous responsibilities, James often secured in a sling across her chest or napping in a makeshift cradle Adam had constructed for the porch. With the mortgage fully paid and their confidence bolstered by 2 successful harvests, they decided to expand their operations slightly, acquiring a small adjacent parcel when the elderly owner decided to move east to live with his daughter. The additional acreage would allow them to diversify their crops, reducing the risk of complete failure in any given year. "Not an empire," Adam explained to 5-month-old James as he carried him along the boundary of the new land, "but enough to give you options when you're grown. Farming if you want it means for education if you don't." Beatrice, walking beside them, smiled at his habitual inclusion of their son in all discussions of the future. "He might want both," she pointed out. "Education and farming aren't mutually exclusive." Adam nodded thoughtfully. "True enough. My pa always said the best farmer is the one who works with both hands and brain." He grinned down at James, who was attempting to grab a strand of his father's wheat-colored hair. "What do you think, son? College and cornfields?" The baby's response was a happy gurgle that both parents chose to interpret as enthusiastic agreement. Life settled into a new pattern that summer, the three of them finding balance between farm work and family time. They celebrated James's first half-birthday with a small gathering of neighbors, many of whom had children of their own. Watching her son interact with these potential future friends, Beatrice felt a deep gratitude for the community that had embraced them. "Your mother would have loved seeing this," Aunt Margaret wrote in response to the photographs they had sent to Boston. "A grandchild was her dearest wish, though she never thought to see it realized. I like to think she knows somehow that she can see the happiness you have found." The letter went on to express Margaret's intention to visit the following summer, a prospect that both surprised and pleased Beatrice, who had come to value her aunt's correspondence and perspective. Fall brought another successful harvest, further solidifying their financial security and allowing for additional improvements to the property. Adam hired 2 local men to help build an extension to the house, a proper nursery for James and any future siblings they might be blessed with, plus a small study where farm records could be kept and correspondence managed away from the bustle of the kitchen. "Quite the businessman you're becoming," Beatrice teased as Adam meticulously recorded the yield and profit from each field in a leather-bound ledger. "Just being thorough," he replied with a smile. "A proper accounting means we can make better decisions for next year." "Your father kept records like this, didn't he?" "Yes," Beatrice acknowledged, touched by his reference to her father's methods, "though his handwriting wasn't nearly as neat as yours." As winter approached again, bringing James's first birthday with it, Beatrice found herself reflecting on the extraordinary journey that had led to this moment. Just over 2 years had passed since that hot summer day when a tall, lean cowboy had walked into her field and offered his help. 2 years that had transformed her from a desperate young woman fighting to save her family's land alone to a wife, a mother, a partner in a thriving farm, and a loving marriage. They celebrated James's birthday quietly at home, with a small cake Beatrice had baked and a wooden rocking horse Adam had crafted in secret over the preceding weeks. The baby, now taking his first tentative steps, was more interested in the colorful wrapping paper than the gifts themselves, a source of amusement for his doting parents. Later that evening, after James had been put to bed in his new nursery, Adam and Beatrice sat before the fire in the parlor, the November wind howling outside making their snug home seem all the more precious. "Happy?" Adam asked, his arm around her shoulders as she leaned against him. "Completely," Beatrice replied without hesitation, "more than I ever thought possible." She tilted her face up to his. "And you," his kiss was answer enough, but he added words for good measure. "I found everything I was looking for the day I walked into your field, Beatrice, everything and more." As they sat together in the warm glow of the fire, Beatrice thought of the long journey that had brought them to this moment, not just the physical miles Adam had traveled from Texas to Wyoming, or her own journey to Boston and back, but the emotional distance they had both covered from solitude to partnership, from uncertainty to confidence, from mere existence to a life rich with purpose and love. Outside, the first snowflakes of winter began to fall, dancing in the lamplight that spilled from the farmhouse windows. Inside, a family that had begun with a chance meeting in a cornfield dreamed and planned for seasons yet to come, secure in the knowledge that whatever challenges the future might bring, they would face them as they had faced all others together, their love a harvest more bountiful and sustaining than any crop they might ever grow. Years passed, each one bringing its own challenges and joys to the Harrington farm. James grew from a toddling boy into a sturdy child with his father's quiet confidence and his mother's sharp mind. He was joined by a sister, Eleanor Margaret, born in the spring of 1880, her arrival easier than her brother's had been, though no less miraculous to her adoring parents. The farm prospered under Adam and Beatrice's careful stewardship. They continued to expand gradually, acquiring adjacent parcels when opportunities arose, diversifying their crops to protect against the vagaries of weather and market prices. By the mid-1880s, they had established one of the most successful operations in the county, known for both innovation and reliability. Adam's transformation from cowboy to respected farmer and family man was complete, though he never lost the straightforward manner and quiet strength that had first drawn Beatrice to him. He took on leadership roles in the community, helping to establish the first proper school in Opal, and serving on committees that worked to bring modern conveniences like telegraph lines and eventually railroad access to their remote corner of Wyoming. Beatrice, too, found her place in the wider community while maintaining her central role at home and on the farm. She organized a women's auxiliary that raised funds for the new school, taught reading classes for adults who had never had educational opportunities, and became known as someone who could be counted on in times of crisis or celebration. Together, they created not just a successful farm but a true home, a place of warmth and welcome where neighbors gathered, where travelers found hospitality, where their children grew surrounded by love and the values of hard work, honesty, and compassion that both parents held dear. In 1887, they welcomed their third child, a boy they named Thomas Edward, completing their family. The little farmhouse that had once seemed so empty to Beatrice now overflowed with life and laughter, the lonely days of her early adulthood a distant memory. One summer evening in 1890, as they sat on the expanded porch watching their children play in the yard, Adam took Beatrice's hand, his thumb tracing the familiar contours of her wedding ring and the pearl engagement ring she still wore despite the hard work of farm life. "Do you ever think about that first day?" he asked, his voice soft with memory. "When I walked into your field uninvited and offered to help," Beatrice smiled, leaning against his shoulder as they had done countless times over the years. "Often," she admitted. "Though sometimes it seems like another lifetime, another person who was so desperate and alone." Adam nodded, his gaze following James as he taught little Thomas how to throw a ball, Eleanor watching with the superior air of an older sister. "I remember how proud you were," he said. "How determined not to accept help, even though you clearly needed it." "I was terrified," Beatrice confessed, "not just of losing the farm, but of trusting anyone again after my mother left, after my father died." She turned to look at him, still handsome despite the lines that years of sun and wind had etched around his eyes. "I'm so glad you were stubborn enough to stay despite my resistance." Adam chuckled, the sound warm with affection. "Stubbornness recognized stubbornness, I suppose. Two mules pulling in the same direction eventually." "Is that what we are, mules?" Beatrice asked with mock indignation. "The finest pair ever hitched," Adam confirmed, pressing a kiss to her temple. "Getting more done together than either could alone." It was true, Beatrice reflected as their children's laughter floated on the evening air. Everything they had accomplished, the thriving farm, their beautiful family, their respected place in the community had been the result of their partnership, of two people who had found in each other exactly what they needed to become their best selves. "Do you ever regret it?" she asked suddenly. "Settling down, taking on a struggling farm and a suspicious woman instead of continuing your adventures?" Adam's arm tightened around her shoulders. "Not for a single moment," he said with absolute conviction. "What adventures could compare to this?" He gestured to encompass their home, their land, their children. "This is the greatest journey I could have ever taken, Beatrice, and I'm grateful every day that you allowed me to take it with you." As the sun set over the land they had nurtured together, casting long golden shadows across fields that had once seemed impossibly overwhelming to a young woman alone, Beatrice felt the familiar swell of gratitude that had become the cornerstone of her life with Adam. What had begun as a desperate struggle for survival had blossomed into something far richer and more meaningful than she could have imagined on that hot summer day when a stranger had joined her in the rows and asked her name. "I love you, Adam Harrington," she said softly, the words no less heartfelt for having been spoken countless times over the years. "And I love you, Beatrice Newman Harrington," he replied, his blue eyes still holding the warmth that had first melted her carefully guarded heart. "Today, tomorrow, and all the days that follow." As darkness fell, and they gathered their children for supper in the home they had built together, Beatrice knew with absolute certainty that the hardships of her early years had been worth enduring for the joy they had led to, a joy found not in perfect circumstances or easy paths, but in the shared journey of two people who had recognized in each other the promise of home.